Next up is our resident mining compliance expert, so Peter Brammall. Peter spent 20 of his 30 years working in mining as a tenement manager, but he began his career as a field technician on a drill rig in Orange. Beautiful place. He actually was involved with the drilling of the first holes into the CadiaMine. And next he became a tenement manager, and then eventually studied to become a lawyer. He regularly provided specialist advice and assistance to the mining industry, and he has a deep and thorough practical understanding of the industry and its challenges. Here to talk to us about the Mining Act and its self-policing, here's Peter.
We're going to do a deep dive back into history of the Mining Act since 1972 and its self-policing principle and how it's moved away from that. We're going to ask, is the Mining Act past its use-by date? Should we stop just amending it and start again? And there's been a few decisions and that have happened since 1972 that have tipped it on its end. And there's a few explorers just exploiting the holes in the Mining Act that have made it a little bit difficult. And the government's non-responsive, or the way they've responded to amending the Act has been less than adequate. I was going to start off with this one, but it's mainly for that table over there. and back in 1990, there was a very smart tenement manager that wanted to get exemptions done over a whole area, and you can use your project expenditure for one particular for the project to get an exemptions for all your project. They started using their mining expenses, and they managed to keep a radius around the mine for about 300 kilometres. The department jumped on that very quickly, but this is an example of what's been happening since 1972, this exploitation of the holes in the Mining Act. This is more important than it seems. The Serpentine Jarrahdale Ratepayers Association objected to sand mining lease on the Serpentine Plains. They said it was going to destroy bushland and native vegetation, upset the residents with the noise and dust, and it was all based on public interest grounds. And the Supreme Court said, well, yes, anyone that's not, regardless of their land ownership, could object under the Act. And what that means today, like 20, 30 years on, there's been an explosion of objections. There's about 2,000 objections lodged annually. Some EAs get as many as 60 objections if they're in very sensitive areas. They had to employ another warden to cater for all these objections, and they've introduced fees for lodging objections, though it's not very much, and if you're a pensioner you can do it for nothing. The department's statistics from this is this is from a couple of years ago. 96% of companies or individuals connected to mining lodge objections to tenement applications. 21% from individuals not directly affiliated with mining. 12% pastoralists, they're not as bad as you think, and 8% of native title parties, but this is trending up, and 3% from other organisations, NGOs and local government areas. And Warden Cleary actually noted that the Warden's Court mightn't be the proper spot to cater for all these concerns. then we jump into the Native Title Act. I tried to put all these things sequentially since 1972, but it didn't actually work out that way because everything jumps back and forward, and so I've just done it by topic, really. So when the Native Title Act was introduced by our esteemed Prime Minister Paul Keating in 1996, it really opened a can of worms in respect to administration of getting tenements granted, because it basically referred tenements into the National Native Title Tribunal, and that had to go through the Native Title Act processes. At the end of it, you either had to sign an ILUA or a regional state heritage agreement. And then you were basically contractually locked into undertaking heritage surveys, and at the moment the price of heritage surveys are pretty much doubling since what they were. Yeah, and the Sheffield case, I'm thinking about cricket now, is actually an example of what can happen when you get thrown into the Native Title Tribunal. So these guys, the DMIRS gave notice that an M was going to be granted under the Future Act process. They didn't reach an agreement. Sheffield applied, I keep trying to say Sheffield Shield, but Sheffield applied to the Native Title Tribunal for a decision to be made. The rep body Cred didn't like this very much. Sheffield tried to go around them and approach the native title parties alone. Then the Cred objected and said that it was not negotiating in good faith, and it goes back and forth between the Native Title Tribunal and the Federal Court, and it was 4 years later until they actually got a signed agreement. It's quite disturbing, and that's not unusual either. It's quite common throughout the industry. Then we jump into the Twal case. This was a case brought by the Twal people against the government. The government actually settled this out of court, and then they placed a compensation agreement with the Twal people that 7% of the exploration expenditure that people spent within this area was going to be the compensation for the Twal people, and for extra value they chucked in another 25 million as well. If this is going to be the trend going forward, this is going to be very expensive for juniors. But Greg McIntyre, who prosecuted the Mabo case, he actually said this will be the future of compensation for Aboriginal people. Then, on top of that, we're locked into a heritage surveys with our Indigenous land use agreements that we signed before we come on board. Then you're also locked in by your conditions of your licence as well. This is from the DPLH recently, very recently, March. I went to a conference on it. There's approximately 36,000 heritage places. Of those, 14,000 are registered sites. The rest of them are sort of going through the process. And of those 14,000 registered sites, there's 7,000 artefact scatters, 36,000 art sites, and 25,000 ceremonial sacred sites. another 800 of state significance. But you can see that on the image that a lot of those follow waterways, Swan River, for example, Fortescue River, and you go there up to the Kimberleys. Then into the mix was thrown Duketon Gorge, which an incident where Rio Tinto legally destroyed a cultural significant cave. There was the Rio Tinto managing director managed to walk away with $42 million payout, but the rest of us were left with the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act that was fast-forwarded, then repealed, and the Aboriginal Heritage Act 1972 was reinstated with substantial amendments, making it more stringent and complex than before. We now face higher penalties, and native title has intensified the scrutiny around heritage sites, and the regulatory burden has significantly increased. Now we're sort of shifting to another area. When I first came over here in '96, I started managing tenure. And if you wanted to keep your ground for your exploration licence that you had to surrender in your third and fourth year, 50% of your tenure, geos were a bit like bowerbirds. They don't want to lose any of the ground, so they were quite happy to peg mining leases over that tenure, and you ended up with all these mining leases everywhere. And this caused the backlog of thousands of mining lease applications across all of WA. What the government did to get around this, because they believed it was being abused and people were just warehousing land, alleged to be warehousing land, they introduced the Mining Act 2006. So if you wanted to lodge a mining lease now, you had to lodge it with a mining proposal or a mineralisation report, and they introduced clear timelines for documentation and lodging supporting documents. They actually changed the partial surrender years from 3 and 4 to 5, then later on to 6 years, realising that there was a whole hold-up of the processing of exploration caused by native title. Then into that mix, we got Forrest versus Wilson. It was 2017. Remember that date, 2017, where there was a couple of sand miners working on the Ashburton River. Twiggy just bought Minderoo Station, didn't want them there, so they made a mining lease application. He objected to it, and it went all the way to the High Court, and the High Court said there's strict compliance with the mining leases. This flowed through the Mining Act from then to now, but the irony of the case was the DMPE guidelines said you had 2 weeks to lodge your mining lease applications. A lot of people took that on board without referring to the Mining Act. And there's a lot of invalid mining lease applications out there now if you want to make yourself rich. There's over 100 of them. But in the same token, another irony was FMG spent $1 million repegging their own mining leases. This was further This precedent was followed by Forrest versus O'Sullivan. The same sand miners operating on the Fortescue River pegged some prospecting licences over the ground. Forrest objected to the applications because they didn't strictly comply with the Mining Act. The pegs were defectively marked. The pegging was defectively marked out. They were the trenches were more than 100 mil away from the posts where they were supposed to be on the posts. The posts were hammered in too far and weren't a metre above. So this reinforced the importance of strict procedural compliance in relation to tenement applications, or the whole Act really. Then we've got the Truefeller case. This is 2022, which triggered quite a few changes. And in this, before the Truefeller case, you only had to have 1 year program of work and supported expenditure and financial ability for that tenure. After this case, it was you had to supply 5 years of program of work, identify the areas to be explored, reasons for selecting these areas, the proposed budget, and demonstrate financial capacity to carry out the proposed exploration for that 5 years, which makes it pretty impossible for smaller players in the market. So the Truefeller case drives another nail into the coffin of the exploration companies. I found this graph, which will be later supported by another presentation by John, that the smaller companies actually do most of the exploration, greenfields exploration, and find the mines. They're nimble enough to do so, and they're pretty much the lifeblood of exploration in WA. Then this is another example. So we're leaving that. We're going on to the Self-Policing Act, where we're supposed to be self-policed by the rules. It was Kidman Resources. He acquired Mount Holland project for 3.5 million from the receivers. A disgruntled chairman, director of the previous company, lodged 49 application for forfeiture over the tenure. He then unsold. It was a gold project initially. Then when his geologists went in there, they sampled the chips and come up with all this lithium. This is right in the middle of the lithium boom. Kidman then unsold it to Wesfarmers and SQM for 800 million plus, but it still had these 49 applications for forfeiture on there. So he had to issue $10 million worth of Kidman shares to the applicant for forfeiture, and they went home rubbing their hands together. This is not a single case. This happens multiple times in WA. It still classes the cowboy centre of exploration because of the self-policing policy behind the Act. Then we have programs of work that have been introduced in 2000, which is not that long ago. It seems to be longer. I might have got the date wrong there. They seem to be in for ages. So if you want to do any exploration work, you have to lodge a POW on the ground. It's pretty much for, it says there for mechanised ground disturbance activity, but it's pretty much for everything. They introduced EMAs in 2021, but you can get a fast-track POW granted for as little as that's supposed to improve the bureaucracy in the department, but you still have to do the POW in the first instance. So you've got all this regulation building on top of one another. Then you go into the Mining Rehabilitation Fund. This was to replace the unconditional performance bond system. It's done that actually very well, I must admit. There's 42 million of contributions in 22-23. The fund has 291 million in it at the moment. And they're starting to do some rehabilitations around the abandoned mines program, filling in all the shafts that are around the areas. But they've only given 2.9 million for the 2023, so it's a drop in the ocean to what needs to be done. But it'll give no one a place to bury their bodies anymore. Yeah. Then we've got the Mining Amendment Act bill that's coming in August. It was supposed to come in 2024, but the Parliament was prorogued. But it's actually being introduced now. They're still rewriting it a little bit. They're removing the contemporaneous lodgement requirements. So when you lodge a mining act, you can lodge a mining proposal later on. Validating past acts and pending applications, but there is problems around going through the Section 35 of Native Title Act, or getting the native title parties to approve the validations of this part. They were supposed to amend the Native Title Act, but they never got round to it. It clarified and simplified the Section 58 statements, so it'll be back to 1 year again. Then it allows digital lodgement of support documents, and it allows tolerance for genuine mistakes. So if you do something a little bit wrong, it'll allow the fixing up of that. With the Mining Act Amendment Bill, it should reduce litigation and objection risks. It improves the fairness and security of tenure, and encourages investors' confidence in the WA mining Act and investment. Yeah. And it streamlines the compliance for DMIRS. I've just seen someone from DMIRS in here, and I thought maybe I shouldn't be so critical. But what's happened since 1972, where you could just peg it, apply for a tenement, it'd be granted, and you'd start drilling 3 weeks later. We've gone to a hyper-compliance environment. If you can get a tenement granted these days within 12 months, you're doing really, really well, let alone do the exploration drilling on it thereafter, and raise the money from the investors as well. So it's a real problem, because if you're a small company, it confuses small players. It leads to unintentional non-compliance, because there's so much compliance you have to do, and discourages greenfields exploration. So what we've got is we've got this regulatory layering. DMP for technical compliance and for environmental compliance. DMIRS and EPA for environmental compliance, DPLH for heritage compliance, native title bodies for access and agreement negotiations. This on top of it's supposed to be a self-managed system, so where it's supposed to police expenditure, is really it's duplicative, it's complex, opaque, especially for juniors with minimal administration capacity. You're really going to need to be on top of your game to get through this system. I picked this photo because you can see some people at the bottom, and this is the sort of the sort of thing you have to do: climb from the bottom over the top of the hill of administration to get a tenement granted, or start exploring on the ground. So what we've ended up with is a really high regulatory burden. There's fear of non-compliance from juniors, and there's an uneven playing field between the larger companies and the juniors, because the larger companies can just put another 3 people on and just suck it up, where the smaller companies don't have that sort of money available. And there's a real compliance trap for many juniors. You know, if you're not spending enough money, you're going to lose your tenement as well, either through plaints or the department. What really needs to happen, we really need to step back, everyone step back, and review the legislation overlaps and interactions between the mining sector, reduce its complexity and enhance accessibility, especially for small scale and emergent explorers, because they're the future of where we're going. So thank you very much, and I hope there's some questions and answers.